I went to multiple therapists at the time, and a lot of therapists will kind of try to talk people down, talk people out of their anger, and they just really don't know what to do with it or even what it stems from, or just treating the symptoms of anger. And that's what society really does.
Hey everyone, Derek Hines here. Welcome to the podcast where I'll share with you the patterns, insights, research, and technologies that we use in my own pain and performance practice to help people improve their health, speed their healing, and increase their longevity. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoy it. Good day, my friends. Welcome to the Pain and Performance Podcast. Today's episode is with Bronwyn Schweigerdt, and she is a therapist that specializes in anger and does a lot of work on anger suppression and how that leads to other emotions, stress, anxiety. And I think we've all seen this. I certainly know that a lot of people who have gone through life have noticed that whenever you hold in emotions, anger specifically, betrayal is something that we get into in this episode, how much that just eats away at you. And so in this episode, we get into what that actually does to you, and it does create a lot of long-term health issues. So how do we overcome that stuff and not let that get to that point where you are having all these physical symptoms, depressive symptoms? When you do feel anger, when you feel betrayal, when you feel frustration, what do we do in the moment to handle those so that we can be a very healthy, happy, joyous individual? But also, if we've gotten into situations where we have long-term health issues, there's a lot of data to suggest that going back and addressing some of these kind of repressed emotions can be very, very powerful. And we've all heard stories, we talk about in this episode, of these miraculous healings because someone went and addressed that. So we get into what would the process look like? What are the steps to going back and overcoming some of those things? I think there's some powerful insights in this. We do talk quite a bit about finding a good therapist and how to do that. But there's also some things that you could just start doing on your own that I think are really helpful to overcome some of these things. And how do you interact with your friends and set expectations? So this is a very helpful communication episode to keep you very healthy and like centered whenever we're dealing with life and expectations and relationships and all that stuff. So I hope y'all enjoy this. I hope you pull some good stuff out of it. Hit me up with any questions or thoughts. I would love to hear your thoughts on this one. So without further ado, listen to this great episode with Bronwyn Schweigerdt. Bronwyn Schweigerdt, welcome to the Pain and Performance Podcast.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here now that I've calmed down a little bit.
Talk about a great way to lead into a conversation on how emotions can affect our health, our body, our mind, all that stuff. We had a few technical difficulties for all of you listening. And, every time you do that, you get these, it's like you said, you get these nerves and these surges and frustration. And then it's how do we handle that? Which is a beautiful way to kind of start this conversation.
Yeah, that is a good way to start. One thing that's really been helpful for me is just to remind myself, okay, this is what human life is like, and I'm a human, and Dr. Hines doesn't expect me to be a robot. He understands being a human too. He understands when there's error, which is a normal human experience, and I don't have to have unrealistic expectations of myself.
Oh, we're gonna unpack some fun stuff even in that. So how did you, let's lay some groundwork for everybody. How did you get to where you were kind of focused, or at least studying the nature of anger and the effects of that? How did you end up in that segment?
I think just as a therapist, it didn't take long for me to just kind of see anger seems to be the one, item that everyone gets wrong. I mean, including the therapist. And I myself became a therapist because I desperately, really, really needed one. I was in a very severe depressive episode myself. And I went to multiple therapists at the time. And I remember thinking to myself while I was sitting there across from the therapist, I'm barely functioning right now, but I still think I could be a better therapist than this person. And again, I had that experience multiple times. And so I went back to school and got another master's degree and became a licensed therapist. But um, anger is the one thing that no one seems to understand, even today. I have a lot of beefs with the therapeutic community, with the mental health community and establishment, teaching anger management, seeing anger, just treating the symptoms of anger. And that's what society really does. A lot of therapists will kind of try to talk people down, talk people out of their anger, and they just really don't know what to do with it or even what it stems from, and address the root problem. So I see anger as like a window on the dashboard of our emotional car saying, warning, something is wrong. Please check under the hood and bring it to resolution. And that's the goal, is to find out what's wrong and resolve it. And we can do that. And that's a permanent, it's not anger management, but it's a permanent solution to the problem. When we just try to manage symptoms, like, okay, take some deep breaths, do some self-talk, take a walk outside, whatever. I mean, you're just managing the symptoms and you're not helping people attune to their anger and say, hey, this is here for a really good reason. And it's trying to warn me. It's trying to give me very valuable information to solve a problem.
It's interesting because when I was kind of doing research for this conversation, a lot of what you say about anger is what we say about pain. Is that in society, we treat pain as the problem when it's always the symptom of, it's the check warning light, the check engine light. It's like, there's a problem you need to come and address, but it's not the pain. The pain is the signal of it. Yeah. So I was listening to you and I was like, okay, we're gonna have this conversation. This is might be a little bit of a curveball, but I feel like maybe it would be helpful for people. One of the questions I had while I was doing this research is like, what is the use of anger? Like throughout history, why did we, whether it's developed, however we want to use that language, why was anger an emotion that stuck with us, that we needed?
Mm-hmm. Well, to save our lives, and to save our mental health. So let me back up with my story. I ended up in this depressive episode that was just so over the top. It was so bad I didn't understand what was happening to me. I was involuntarily and sporadically vomiting, while I was walking down the street, driving my car. I couldn't pull off. Like, I didn't know that you could fall into a depression that severe, looking back. But in retrospect now, as a therapist, I see that that depressive episode and every subsequent one after that, because I had a few after that, every single one of them were a manifestation of suppressed anger. And really, when I say anger, I'm going to be more specific, betrayal. Because, anyone can make us angry. People who drive and cut us off on the road make us angry, but they can't betray us. And because we don't have that expectation of them, we don't have that relationship. So when it's someone we love, who we have this expectation of, that they're going to meet us where we're at when we're really struggling, and we don't have that expectation met, it's a level of anger that's so profound and so painful. If we don't know it's there, if we don't feel entitled to say, hey, something's really wrong, and it's not okay that I'm struggling over here and at my most vulnerable, and you're like 1,000 miles away. And in this case, this was my husband. He was like 1,000 miles away, and I was struggling at my worst. And I was feeling betrayed and angry at him, but I wasn't cognizant up here of that. My body was very aware of it. And so instead of me, because I wasn't aware of it, because I didn't stop and say, hey, Steve, I need you to come and be with me while I'm struggling, and attune to me and ask me more and draw me out and comfort me and reassure me, because I didn't know to say that or ask for that. My body just, all that anger that was suppressed in my body just turned into depression. And, Freud first said that depression is anger turned inward. He couldn't have been more right on. And as a therapist, I see that not only with depression, but anxiety, panic, mania, psychosis. All those things are absolutely the result of suppressed anger, where a person doesn't, first of all, cognizantly know that they are angry, and they don't feel entitled to say, hey, this isn't okay. And so our anger is really there to give us equilibrium, emotional, mental well-being, to express ourselves with assertive speech, with boundaries, maybe with an ultimatum, maybe with accountability. It's not there to blow up. It's just there to get our needs met so we're healthy.
Yeah, I mean, it makes some sense if you think like our survival at some point was like predicated on trust. Like if you had 5 people trying to survive the wilderness, whatever, thousands of years ago, you had to really trust that those people would live up to your expectations and or at least try, right? And if you were betrayed, it would make sense that your body would want to say, hey, this is at some point going to threaten our survival. So you need to like know that that's not okay. And today, maybe it's a slightly different version of survival, but it makes sense that that's there. I've never quite kind of put that together in terms of like, I understand the stress response, but anger was always like, why would that emotion have been in there from like, throughout human history? And it seems like it has been. But that makes a lot of sense in terms of the survival stuff. So we know that like emotions, and I mean, you felt this very, very acutely, when you study stress, anxiety, depression, anger, a lot of the studies I found was like, there's this pathway between anger, stress and depression, anger, anxiety, stress and depression, back into anger. And like, it seems like it's kind of a two-way street. We know that those things are one of the most detrimental things for health, in terms of inflammation, longevity, heart disease. Like you go up and down. Why do you think that is? Like, what's the mechanism when people are in these kind of chronic anger states that turn into other emotions or don't? What's happening to people? What's happening in the body in those situations?
Yeah, that's such a good point. So my first master's is actually in nutrition. So, and
Nice.
I never would have believed what we're talking about right now. Back in the day, I would, even just a few years ago, I'd be like, autoimmune disorders are completely a result of diet and lifestyle. And now I'm like, oh, I think most of them are suppressed anger in our bodies. So, um, not that nutrition doesn't play a huge role, or, lifestyle, but I would say I don't know exactly what happens, but I do believe that even though emotions, including anger, are invisible, they're actually more real than anything physical and material and tangible. So anger is more real than this computer that I'm on right now. It's more real than this table. And it lives in our bodies. And it doesn't just dissipate. It doesn't just evaporate into the ether just because it's invisible. I really believe that if we have suppressed anger we're holding on to, especially by someone close to us, where we are expecting them to come through for us and they're not chronically, or they haven't and they've never owned it and apologized and made good on it, that anger really lives in our bodies and it really haunts us. And it really affects us. And I believe that anger affects our tissues, especially our white blood cells, apparently. I believe it does cause autoimmune disorders. I believe it causes migraines. Like I have so many clients who come with like chronic headaches they've had for years. And in therapy, like they will not have them anymore, like very quickly, if they're ready and willing and able to do the work. I myself had insomnia on and off, but mostly on for over a 30-year period. And I have a lot of clients who will have the opposite of insomnia. They'll actually like hypersomnia, where they're just sleeping all the time. So I see how it impacts our bodies. And, but I want to give a hopeful story, because I really believe all we have to do to get the anger out of our bodies is express it in words. Like that externalizes the anger. And we don't have to do it with the person we're angry at. We don't, because a lot of times that would be counterproductive. A lot of times that person is not a safe person to externalize our anger to with our words. So you can do that with a good therapist who will just listen and validate you and be angry with you and for you. You can do that with a friend who's willing to be angry with you and for you. So what we need is someone who hears us, who validates us, who we feel angry with. We're not alone in our anger, and we just express it into words. I write, I've written fantasy letters to people, and sometimes I send them, sometimes I edit them a lot, and then I send them. Sometimes I never send them. But just externalizing it out of my body into language is so therapeutic and really important. So that's just simply how we can do it.
Yeah, I have a good friend of mine who was suffering from quite a few health issues. She had maybe her second baby that spiraled a bunch of health problems, had some postpartum depression, and then same thing, wasn't getting help. That ended up creating quite a deep kind of wound in a lot of ways. But one of the things that she's talked about to this day is something called the empty chair. Have you heard of that?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it was that she had a childhood trauma from her parents, and so with her therapist, and I think kind of in a little bit of a group setting, they have an empty chair, and she expressed all of the anger and resentment and issues while they were all kind of being supported. And she was like, this sounds ridiculous if you think of like you talking to an empty chair, but she was like, when you get into it and you're like, Mom, this is the stuff.
Yeah.
Like, this is what I needed from you. I didn't know it, ...
Yeah.
And look, she was doing a lot. I'm not going to say it was only that, but the change in the person was dramatic. And like that moment seemed to be like the turn. And then, yes, same thing you said, like, yes, she did do a lot of health things. She was doing testing. She was doing a bunch of that. But that like gave her the step to do it and the energy to do it. And then ... And it was like new person, completely new person. And very, very powerful. And, you read stories, and some of this is from like meditation retreats, but of these like spontaneous healings when people like get it out and then they kind of come to grips with it. And a lot of them will talk about like they process the anger and then they come all the way back down to forgiveness. And like you have all these spontaneous changes in health of like, tumors going away and cancer healing and autoimmune issues getting better. And you're like, okay, this needs to be talked about and given people an outlet that is helpful.
Yeah.
But I don't find that in healthcare, at least, I'm sure in your world, it's more than healthcare. That's probably not a very big leg up, but we don't talk about this stuff very much. Why do you think that is? Is it because there's a stigma around it? Is it because we don't know what to do with it? Why aren't we giving people that?
Goodness. Well, it doesn't make a lot of money, so there's that. I don't know. I mean, I've kind of given up on Western medicine pretty much entirely, for a lot of reasons. But yeah, I just don't think it's rooted in wisdom. I think what the medical model has become, and that's including now the therapeutic model in our country, is really just managing symptoms and not even like caring if there's a root problem. And so it's really sad.
I think most of the people who are listening to this have had something that has kind of made them angry that they didn't express,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
Like that's that is human.
Yeah, that is human. I want to pause there. That is human. Yeah. So, we have the stigma, like, oh, I'm not an angry person. What I want to say is there's no such thing as an angry person, because that's like saying I'm not a breathing person. Have you met someone who's not a breathing person? Then we all have anger. That is a human phenomenon that is endemic to being human and living on planet Earth, like where the real and the ideal are often, most of the time, almost all the time, not one and the same. So whenever the real deviates from the ideal, we're going to have anger. We just are. That is the human response. And there's nothing shameful about that. And a lot of us were raised in families or in a culture where it's shameful. Don't be angry. That's sinful. That's bad. That's, whatever. And it's like, that's human. And anger is not bad. It can be bad when we suppress it and then we explode but what matters isn't having anger. What matters is our relationship to our anger and having a healthy relationship to our anger. And so all we need to do, when I get angry at my husband, I'll say, Steve, I'm starting to feel resentful right now. Okay, that's me expressing my anger in that moment. That's my relationship with anger is, starting to pay attention or paying attention to my body. That's self-attunement, where I'm attuning to myself and I'm starting to feel resentful because I told him this and he said he'll do it and he still hasn't. So now I'm like, okay, I'm feeling the resentment right here. And now I'm going to express it out of my body and say, hey, I'm starting to feel resentful because it's been like 10 minutes and whatever. That's me attuning. That's my relationship to my anger in that moment. And, that's not threatening. He doesn't go, oh my God, you're so angry. You're such an angry person. He goes, oh, well, I appreciate you telling me you're starting to feel resentful because I don't want it to get worse. So I'm going to go do X, Y, and Z, or we're going to talk about it. So that's what a healthy relationship with anger looks like, is just saying something like, hey, Derek, that's not okay. Or, hey, I don't like that tone of voice. Let's wait until you can have a kinder tone.
Yeah. I think in a relationship, and that's probably the most powerful way to do, like, that's the most powerful time to use this is like someone you're in a relationship with. Do you have, whether it's couples or individuals, would you have them almost like script out, hey, when you start to feel this, like, here's how you get into it? Because even like the words, I'm thinking of like a situation like that. It's like, how do I get to where I have the muscle to do this when I feel it? And I almost feel like I would have to practice it, to be honest. Like, these are the words you say. Hey, I don't really like that. That makes me, feel angry or frustrated. And I would probably like have 3 or 4 words depending on my relationship with the person, like how strong I wanted that to come across. I don't know. What's your thoughts on that?
So it really starts with self-attunement. So paying attention to our bodies. Like, what am I feeling? I'm starting to, I'll have clients say, I'm starting to, like, my temple's starting to throb right now just talking about this. I'm like, okay, what's right here? Like, what's going on? What is this right temple want to say right now in fantasy? So that's self-attunement, just paying attention. Like, okay, I'm starting to, like, it's getting a little hard to breathe right now because I'm feeling the resentment, and so really, like, first of all, just like attuning to ourselves and going, it's okay to feel resentful because you have reminded him twice now and he's still not doing it. That's okay. That's not bad. That's not a negative. And our feelings tell us our needs. So we want to pay attention to our feelings. What am I feeling right now? I'm feeling really disappointed because I expected this. So what do I need when I feel disappointed? Well, I guess I need to hear reassurance, Derek, from you that won't happen again, or that next time it will be this way, or that we can manage my expectations or something like that. So what am I feeling, and what do I need when I feel that way?
So that's I'm just in the moment when people are doing this. I feel like there's almost 2 things that I want people to get from this is like, when you have these, how do you stop them from spiraling? And I think that's the conversation we're having right now. I'm going to put a pin in, like, okay, what if somebody's listening to this and they think some of their issues are coming from like some repressed anger that's coming from the past? But let's hold that.
Oh,
for a
like
second.
A trigger, you mean? Like they're being triggered in the present?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. Let's hold that for a second though.
Okay.
So we're going throughout our day to not let the process that we were talking about earlier of emotions taking kind of the negative pathway in the body towards all these health. If we notice it, like, in some way express it. If we feel it, like, where in our body are we feeling it? Being attuned to that. What am I feeling from this? Am I feeling a pit in my stomach? Am I feeling like I'm getting short of breath? Am I feeling pressure in my head? Whatever that is, like, something happened and I've got this response to it. What does I think that response means? And then, like, can I get that out somehow?
Yes. So we call it name it to tame it. And we use that with children, with parenting. We teach parents, but we need to do that for ourselves. So naming the feeling. There's a great free word list online. It's called the Soul, Soul, Soul word list. And you can Google that and you'll get a PDF file. And it has, I don't know, probably 80 different feeling words. And it's really helpful. I will just have my clients Google it while we're on session and I'll say, hey, take a minute or two and just look over all these words and tell me which ones best resonate with what you're feeling in your body right now. So it's really helpful just to have it named. And if we can name it, if I'm like, what am I feeling right now? I'm feeling rejected, actually. Ooh, okay. So just me naming it, when we put it into words, even just for ourselves, even if I'm not saying it out loud, I'm just like, oh, I am feeling rejected. Just having that word, now I'm able to master the feeling instead of the feeling mastering me. So that process of naming it is really imperative for starters.
Love it. Love it. So is there anything else that we should like think about or do kind of throughout our daily lives to not let these things become a cycle, to not end up in that?
Yes. So the more we're able to attune okay, so I'll give you an example. I spoke with a client yesterday and she was telling me how she was driving her brothers and sisters on a vacation together and then their partners as well. So there were like 6 people she was driving around in Yellowstone National Park. And she felt very micromanaged, backseat driven by one of them the whole time, but she never said anything. So she just tried to go, oh, it's okay. I'm just gonna keep driving. And she just ignored it. So she suppressed all of that resentment from this. And this is a woman in her 60s. And this is a woman micromanaging who's in her 60s. Like, okay. So she never said anything. And then at the end of the day, she finally blew up. She yelled at the woman. Okay. Well, I said, what if from the start you had just been a mirror? So I encourage people, be a mirror. So what she could have said is, Natalie, I'm feeling kind of micromanaged and, backseat driven right now. And it doesn't feel good. And I'm not comfortable with this. So, maybe if you can't take a break from that, then maybe I shouldn't be the one driving right now because this isn't working for me. So that's just being assertive. And we do that from the get-go. And as we do that, we're asserting our feelings. What am I feeling? I'm feeling kind of resentful that I'm being treated like a 5-year-old right now, or whatever, however we want to say it. And what do I need? I need for you to either stop or for someone else to drive.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like this would be one of those good times. I think that it's hard sometimes to get that out if you're not used to it, like if you're not used to being assertive. So, we talk a lot about like building the muscle. That was almost what I was kind of getting at. Like I would feel like I need to like practice this somehow. But I remember we use this in business a lot where if there's something like that that's happening and we're like, I don't know how to say it the right way. One of the easiest things is to say something like, separate how I say this from what the words are, but I need to get this out to you. So like, don't like how I say this. If it comes across wrong, I apologize. I don't quite know how to say it, but this is making me feel frustrated whenever you do that. Because like people worry, am I going to come across too strong? Am I going to come across and make them angry?
Well, I want to address what you're talking about, Derek. So this is really imperative. I'm glad you brought this up because that's what needs to be brought up. So first and foremost, before we do any of this, before it's going to feel comfortable or natural, is to know there's this invisible boundary in the world between all of us humans that we can't see, but we need to know it's there, where, Derek, you and you alone are responsible for your feelings. And I alone am responsible for my feelings. I am not responsible for your feelings. I am responsible to you, but I am never responsible for you. The only person I am responsible for is me. So if I say something that might sound offensive to you. If I'm saying, hey, Derek, I'm feeling uncomfortable with all this like backseat driving right now. If that's hard for you to hear, that's not my problem. That's not my responsibility. It is my responsibility to be responsible for my feelings of resentment. And I'm not able to do that if I don't tell you that, because adults use their words to express their feelings. We don't play games. We don't just kind of go, Derek, thanks for all the help while I'm driving. We don't do passive aggressive little game playing. We don't expect people to read between the lines and know what we're feeling. Adults just state their feelings as they come up, and that's how we can be responsible to each other. So if I say, hey, I'm feeling kind of micromanaged, Derek, what do you think about that? Like, tell me what you're feeling about that right now, because that's what I'm experiencing, and there's something needs to change. If your feelings are hurt, you're free to express that to me, but I'm not responsible for those feelings.
Yeah, I think that's probably, certainly in the business world, that's probably what you're trying to get to, is almost like subtly saying, like, look, this is what's going on. This is what I need to say. So it's got to come out. It's much better that it comes out now than me blowing up in 2 hours. That's a great story. I know there's lots of husbands and wives listening to this that are like, okay, at the beginning of the road trip, let's get that out before that thing spirals.
Well, and so when we start being responsible for our own feelings like this, we're becoming integrated people. So we're becoming more integrated and people of integrity. And when we become more integrated, there are going to be people who aren't going to like the new Bronwyn, who are going to be like, whoa, like, I'm not used to you being so assertive. And you know what? That's okay. I'm fine if I want to let go of some of those relationships, because I can no longer afford to betray myself. We have to be true to ourselves. And if we're chronically betraying ourselves, we will experience anxiety and depression or some kind of mental dysfunction. So, but there are also going to be people who are like, wow, Bronwyn, I like how, like, what you see is what you get. I like how I really feel like this trust for you, because I don't have to like read between the lines. I don't have to walk away from our conversation like guessing, like, did she feel this way? Like, so some people are going to love the more integrated me. Some people are not. And you know what? I'm okay, because at the end of the day, what matters is what I feel about me.
Yeah, I can see how this would unpack a lot for people. Like, hey, I started doing this and I expressed it, and then I got back this response, and then that triggered another one. So like, I can see where it working through all of this you would end up like in such a different place as a person, because you're starting to say things, and we're not, unfortunately, at least in my experience, we're not used to communicating on this level very often. So it almost probably shocks people to a point where they're like, then that makes them feel something, and so they throw another thing, another bar back at people. And so you really are making sure you're happy with who you are, what you're saying, what you feel, and you're like, this is what I feel like. I can see the therapeutic impact of constantly like unpacking, like, no, that's on them, that's not on me. I can express what your behavior does to me, and that's okay, even if that makes you feel a little weird.
Yeah. And so when those people who are going to give you the barb, so you can be a mirror to them. And I promise you do that once, they won't give you another barb, because the people who are the most, what we call toxic or borderline or whatever, what they cannot tolerate is a mirror with a true reflection of themselves. So if I encounter someone who is like giving me a really mean little quip, I'll say, that's interesting that you feel the need to say that right now. I'm just wondering, are you like going for like a shaming, a public humiliation thing? What's going on? So, you just be a mirror. I don't have to attack them. But I also don't have to betray myself and pretend like it didn't just happen. I can be like, oh, is this like, are you feeling kind of challenged with like what you're experiencing and feel the need to kind of put me down a little, I'll just say it. You just narrate it. You just be a mirror.
So let's kind of shift gears a little bit. For people, because I've heard of this, I've seen it. We talked about it earlier, where someone's had kind of longstanding issues, and they start to think like, I do feel like some of my either mental or it could be physical issues are from some suppressed anger, whether that's from parents, spouse, friends, family.
Yeah.
What's the process to unpack that? Like, let's say you're like, I feel like this is from childhood. I'm 60 and I feel like I still haven't quite dealt with anger from childhood. What's the process look like with that person?
I mean, that's super common, actually. So it is from childhood, because in our early childhood, it's when we develop our own relationship to anger. It's formed in that crucible. It's formed in our relationship mainly with our parents. So we experienced anger, and we learned to either suppress because we learned that when we show anger, we might experience emotional abandonment. Like, mom might suddenly get really cold and kind of like not make eye contact with us and kind of like do this little silent treatment thing. And, children cannot tolerate being abandoned by their primary caretaker. So in our unconscious mind, anger becomes very dangerous because it means abandonment. Or we've seen modeled for us dad's angry, raging outbursts, and so that orients our relationship to anger that way. So that all was formed, that template was formed in childhood, and we do have to go back to that, and we have to unlearn the relationship we have developed with anger and relearn a healthy relationship. So, and doing that is also healing our relationship with our inner child. And I'm a big proponent of healing our relationship with ourselves.
Yeah. Are there any resources for that you put for people of like, look, this is, I know this is a difficult topic. I don't expect us to give them like, hey, do this and you're going to be like, there's so much to unpack when we get into these situations. Are there really good resources you've pointed patients to? I mean, obviously getting with a therapist that you relate to and you feel like is helping you, but
good luck. Sorry, I have not had good experiences with therapists myself, and I have a lot of clients come to me and I just hear a lot of bad stories. So sorry, I don't want to be a downer on that, but a lot of therapists don't know how to do this. But as far as resources, I would just right now off the top of my head just name my own podcast, which is why I'm doing it. It's a passion project just to help people to learn to reorient and heal their relationship with their anger and with themselves. And that's called Angry at the Right Things. I have one of my most popular episodes is on codependency and kind of defining what that is, because a lot of us are codependent. I think a lot of people who are self-help oriented tend to be on the codependent spectrum. And so codependents have learned to very much suppress their anger. And the definition for codependency for me is people who are very attuned to everyone else's feelings and have no idea what they're feeling. So a codependent is like, I will do anything, Derek, not to make you mad. I just want to take your emotional temperature and make sure you're okay. But they are angry and they have no idea they're angry. And so they get anxious. A lot of times I see more anxiety than depression with a lot of codependents.
So let's stay on that, because I think it kind of goes back to what we were talking about a minute ago. So someone who is in that situation, are you trying to find the initial source of some of the anger? Like, are you trying to get them, like I'm thinking of somebody, it's like, are they having to go back and say like, where do I still feel angry at, someone in my life? Or do you need to find that source to be able to process it?
I think that is ultimately ideal, but it's not hard. So I would say, what I do with my clients is they'll tell me about, we're talking about the present relationships that where they are experiencing the most hurt or pain. And wherever that's showing up in the present will take us right back to the original template forming relationship with a parent, usually. So it's the same dynamic. So those are our triggers that we just experience in the present. And when we're triggered, in the present, our experience is exacerbated. Whatever I'm experiencing in the present with you is way larger than it really is. It's disproportionate to what's actually happening because I'm being triggered from a past experience. And I will say for most people, triggers are where we feel abandoned or threatened with abandonment or rejection. And those things are one and the same, rejection and abandonment. They feel exactly the same to us. So Derek, if I'm talking to you and I'm telling you something really important to me, and now you're like looking at your phone, and we can all identify that would be really just objectively annoying. But if that's a trigger for me because I didn't get the eye contact I really needed as a child, I'm going to be triggered by you looking at your phone like way more disproportionately than the situation calls for. And so I might start getting really angry. And so I need to be aware of my trigger because, again, I alone am responsible for my feelings. You are not. But if I'm triggered, I am naturally going to be inclined to make you feel responsible for my feelings, right? And so that whole dynamic needs to get unpacked. But I need to know and be aware. I am triggered when people look away while they're talking to me. And that's my trigger. And I need to manage that. And I can do that by saying, hey, Derek, would you mind just making eye contact while we talk? That's how I can be responsible for my feelings, and you can be responsible to me and not for me.
What does like true healing from anger look like? Like, what's the end of that, if that makes sense?
Yeah. I see some clients where, like, I had one client, we just wrapped up, we worked together for a year, which is long for me, but I told her in our final session, I said, it's like you're a different person. I feel like I'm talking to a different person. And she goes, I feel like I am a different person. And it was like we were both crying. It was so beautiful. She's like, I'm fully present now. For this person, she's like, I used to live in the future. I was like, that was my escape, like living in these fantasies I would make in my head or empathizing with other people. And there were all ways to distract from her present anger, her loneliness, her pain. And she's like, I'm just so present now and I'm so content and I don't need to distract myself with this and this and this. And it was just so beautiful. It was like she was solid. Like she became a solid person of substance. Like she was integrated and whole. That's what it felt like.
What do you think was the biggest kind of impact for her?
Externalizing. Okay. So for a lot of people, it's not just anger, it's actually hatred. And that sounds very negative, but I will say our gut is where we feel disgust. Disgust and hatred are one and the same. It's also where we feel shame. And I think those things are all the same. I think when we have self-hatred, it's shame and disgust. But when we feel like hatred for someone else, it's right there as well. And when we are able to externalize that in fantasy and say to, allow our 3-year-old self to say to our mom in fantasy, like, Mom, I hate you right now because this is evil. What you are doing, what you're saying is evil and wrong. And it's a natural human response to feel hatred. And I hate you and I'm going to stop hating me. I'm going to stop turning this hatred in on myself and carrying it around in my body. So really profound, like experiential exercises like that in fantasy. Mom never knows this happens, so it's really for the client there.
Yeah, a lot of times when I've had these conversations, it's like the source is no longer around. Like I was at a conference, we were talking about this, and it's like the guy's like, I think it might have been his father, but someone like that, and he was like, they're not alive anymore. And I'm like, I wish I could have gotten this, but it sounds like you don't. That's not the need. It's not for them. It's for you.
Yeah, and it probably would be counterproductive if you really were to do it. So
Yeah. Let's can we talk about expectations for a second? I know we've kind of mentioned that, and I think this is probably one of the areas that you kind of step away from some of the other therapists in the world, is kind of like your thoughts and views on expectations and what those mean for us. So when we expect someone to uphold something, some ideal in our lives, and they fail on that, I think a lot of people say, well, that's because you shouldn't have expected that of people. You shouldn't have expectations of other people.
Yeah. Unfortunately, yes, you're right.
So how should we handle that? I think is the real question that I'd like to get into. Is how should we handle our expectations for others? How should we think about expectations, what we expect of the people in our lives? I know that's a big question, but I'd love to unpack that for a minute.
Okay, yeah. So before we say how should we expect, I mean, let's look at how as humans we just naturally have these invisible, unspoken expectation of other humans. And the closer to that other human is to me, so if it's my partner, my spouse, my parent, I'm naturally going to expect them to attune to me, to prioritize my feelings, my needs, to respect my limitation. And those are just natural human expectations that we all have, and we should have. We're going to say should. We should. And if that person doesn't do that, if they're not valuing my feelings, if they're not helping to meet my needs, and if they're not respecting my limits, then that tells me, it doesn't say to me first and foremost, Bronwyn, just manage your expectations. What that tells me is that's not a safe person. And that person might be my partner. That person might be my parent. And so that tells me a lot. That's very telling, and I need to be aware of that. So I can say, wow, my dad is not a safe person, I'm realizing. And I am betraying myself in relationship to him because, parents are actually supposed to really value their children's feelings and needs and respect their limits. And he's not, and that he's not being a healthy human. And so now that I know that, now that I see him as not a healthy person, now I can manage my expectations and say, well, he's not healthy. I can't expect him to change because I've tried to talk to him about it and he's unwilling. So what am I going to do next to not betray myself in relationship with him? Is that going to mean an ultimatum with like, if we're going to have a relationship and you're not going to change, then maybe we can't have a relationship? I mean, that's actually what I am doing with my father, who I haven't talked to in about a year. And he has not taken me up on that ultimatum, unfortunately, for both of us. But fortunately for me, I'm sleeping great now. So that's one thing. If I manage my expectation, I can say, hey, you're not respecting my limits. You're not, really valuing what I feel or what I need. I just can't really see you as much as you would like me to. Or when I do experience you, I'm not gonna share a whole lot. I'm gonna keep my cards to my chest, So those are all things we can do to manage our own expectations.
Yeah, it's interesting as you're saying that. I'm thinking that a lot of people, we don't necessarily share what we expect of someone else in different situations in their lives, and from many areas that I work with people on, one of the best things is to say, like, look, what are you expecting out of this relationship or situation? And when people come to it from that, where it's like this understanding on both ends, it's like, oh, that's so nice.
Yes.
This is great. I know what you expect from me.
Yeah.
I know what I expect from you. We're both on board with it. This is incredible.
Right. That's very adult. Talk, use your words. Let's talk it through. What are the expectations here?
This might be a little bit strange, but how do you see this in like the healthcare setting? So we work with a lot of patients who are suffering from different pain issues. I've got to imagine that a lot of your clients come to you and have been through different versions of the healthcare system. Where do you see this fall in the line of like, typical treatment of a person? I mean, where do people often go when they're dealing with this? Is probably primary care doctor, right? Would be the initial, hey, I'm feeling like I'm having symptoms of depression or anxiety. But where do you see the, I guess, the change that needs to take place in the healthcare model?
Yeah, I don't have a lot of optimism for that. So, I had a client tell me, yeah, I have panic attacks. And so I went to the doctor, and all she offered me was either medication or I don't remember. I think it was just medication. And I thought, what did you expect the doctor to offer you? Because that's all they can offer you these days. That's all they will. And so I think it's even an interesting question. Like, what do you think the doctor is going to offer? Because they are so limited. It's just pretty much surgery and medication. So I think we have to manage that expectation. And that expectation on ourselves, like we have to be our own advocate. We have to do our own research. We have to self-nurture. I mean, that's really what that is self-nurture. Be willing to do the work. We cannot outsource our healthcare to professionals, even the really good ones. We have to do it for ourselves.
Yeah, that's, I think, again, I see a lot of reflections of this in the pain world. It's kind of the same thing. What do you expect from them besides that? That's kind of where we're at currently. My hope is with information, people can make better decisions and people can start to think slightly differently about some of these things. If you could tell people like one change of how they think about anger, what would that be?
Yeah, so anger is that light on the dashboard of your emotional car saying, hey, you're important, you matter, and something needs resolution or else it will hurt you more if you ignore it. Don't ignore it. Just like we don't look at the light on the dashboard of our car, go, that's so annoying. Like, I wish it would just go off. That wouldn't be a smart decision.
Right.
Same thing. So your anger is saying you matter. Don't betray yourself because it will catch up on you.
Yeah, that's good. It's not negative.
It's
like
not
anger is not a
negative.
negative emotion, which that alone, that realization alone might set somebody free and kind of make some big changes in their lives. For those listening who feel like they have like some of this going on in their lives, whether that's affecting health or whatever, like what's the steps you would guide them through for this? And I'd love to hear kind of your thoughts on good therapists, bad therapists. How do we recognize that in that as well?
Yeah. So a good therapist is like a good friend. First and foremost, they are going to listen to you and they're going to believe you. Okay. I've had a couple therapists who they're like, I could tell they don't really believe me. Or they're trying to already talk me out of what I'm saying and defend the other party that they've never met, they know nothing about, they barely know me. So a good therapist is going to listen and believe you. And listening is like, I like to call it deep listening. So, deep listening is like, wow, tell me more. Help me understand. Was that the first time this happened? Or what was the worst part of that? Help me. So deep listening is going to invoke more questions, good questions, and really get to know you. So the current, one of the most popular current models of therapy is called CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, also DBT, which is dialectical behavioral therapy. Unfortunately, those two are really being used a lot, and they're supposedly evidence-based. They're not in the long term at all. But in the short term, I guess they can run some tests that make them look like they are. somehow evidence-based, but they really just manage symptoms. So if you go to a therapist who's practicing CBT, they're going to listen for maybe 10 minutes, maybe, and go, well, Derek, you're depressed. So have you thought about like going out more and maybe like being more social or like exercise? Okay, that's behavioral, what we call behavioral therapy. You could Google that. Like, of course, if you Google, I'm depressed, what should I do? You're going to find behavioral techniques, which mean go out more, get some sunlight, get up earlier, have a sleep schedule. You don't need a therapist for that. A therapist is a human. And the point of you going to a human isn't to find tips to manage yourself. What a therapist can offer you and should be offering you is someone who listens deeply, asks good questions, and helps you is a mirror for you. They're going to mirror you. They're going to help you see yourself clearly. They're a clear, good mirror giving you a true reflection. So they might mirror you and say, wow, it sounds like you experience a lot of loneliness. Is that right? So that's being a mirror. And as you learn to trust them because they really are showing that they care and they're showing concern and they're showing interest and they're patiently listening to you, as you trust them, as you talk more, you're going to start figuring things out on your own. You're going to have like these epiphanies. I have a lot of clients who will say, wow, now that I'm saying that, I'm realizing, oh my God, I've never put that together. So they're creating an environment for you to have these epiphanies, these revelations to yourself. And that's not all, but they're going to help do that with you. They're going to say, yeah, did you ever think that, that might be, your childhood was also very lonely. So do you think that might be, triggering you now? So they're going to help with that, and they're going to help you see yourself clearly and work through that. So that's the very beginning.
Yeah, that's perfect. I've heard so many stories that were the same as yours of not being respected in therapy. Certainly, it seems to be worse when it's in like almost like the addiction realm. Anybody who gets in that, it's like the therapy doesn't seem to be very, very effective, or not on this realm where it's like, listening, believing, and giving you the safe space to kind of go through some of that stuff. How should you feel? This is like a personal curiosity, I guess. How should you feel in the beginning of this? Like if you're starting to go through this and you're leaving sessions like that, what's that feel like for the person, like the experiencer of it? Should we expect to feel like, hey, this is good? This goes back to our setting expectations, right? So what should people expect in the beginning of making these changes?
Yeah, so I would expect to have insight and self-awareness for myself. If I'm going to therapy, I want to develop self-awareness and insight, and I'm going to feel relief. I'm going to feel relief in my body because I'm starting to understand myself and I'm able to express what I'm feeling and feeling validated. So another term is with emotions, what's shareable is bearable. So if I'm expressing my anger and it's being shared now because Derek, you're hearing me and you're getting angry with me and for me, that anger is now being externalized out of my body and I'm feeling relieved. So I'm going to walk out of there feeling like, and I'm going to actually sleep better that night. I would expect that. Absolutely.
Yeah, my brain always goes back to like the science stuff. So that would be my exciting thing would be to like watch health metrics as somebody goes through this. Like, how do we handle sleep? How does our body handle like even, there's been tons of studies on like glucose management and stress response. I don't know if there's ever been one where somebody going through therapy, certainly if it's centered around anger, I would love to see that. That would be a very fun thing to look at. Bronwyn, this is fantastic. I've got a lot of notes. I want to almost go and like spend some time journaling on it, and it made me think like, where is a role for that stuff? Like a lot of what we've talked about is like interactive things.
Mhm.
Is there a role for stuff that people can kind of do on their own? Journaling, meditation, you know,
Yeah.
any other types of therapy that you found to be beneficial in some of this?
Yeah. So I have one episode of my podcast where I talk about, I'm not a big fan of meditation per se, but I am a fan of reflection. And those aren't always the same. So in as far as I know, how we interpret meditation, that's just clearing your mind. I don't think we really need to clear our mind and keep our minds clear. I think we need to kind of create space, and that might be when I go out for a walk or with music on, even. Like it doesn't need silence necessarily, but clear space and time in my life for reflection. So if I can create time just to reflect, and I am going to allow myself to cultivate time to just reflect on my last fight with my child, with my partner, really like on the things that are bothering me or have bothered me. I want to reflect on that. And as I reflect, what was I feeling when I was triggered like that? What was I feeling? What was that? You know, when am I most triggered? What are these commonalities now that I'm starting to reflect on myself? Oh, I'm noticing a pattern. So looking for patterns with the people in our lives. Oh, now that I'm reflecting on my interactions with them, this pattern actually shows up. Wow. It's like kind of always there now that I'm reflecting on it. So that's how we can do our own work, is just spending that time reflecting, and creating that space for that.
Thank you for that. I'm glad I asked that. We have talked about this. Some of the healthiest people that I know in terms of like relationships and just like this authentic joy in their lives seem to be very reflective. Like they can tell you when they did things, what they were feeling around those decisions and actions. And it always strikes you as like, man, that's a really good trait to have, because you're always kind of in a good space with what has happened because you've reflected on it and like what got you through that and into those situations, out of those situations. So we were talking about it this past weekend. So it's very interesting that you bring that up.
Well, that's it. That's a type of self-attunement.
Awesome. So we ask all of our guests, I have no doubt what this answer will be, but if people are listening to this and they're finishing their walk, whatever it is, and they can do one thing today to improve their health, what would that one thing be?
I would say prioritize healing your relationship with yourself, because we can't be whole in relationships with anyone else if we're not healed and whole and integrated with ourselves.
Amazing answer, as I had no doubt. Bronwyn Schweigerdt, thank you so much. The podcast is Angry at the Right Things. Very, very good. I did listen to the episode. That was probably the most common one that was on codependence.
Oh, that's the one you chose.
And I'm like going through, and for some reason that one jumps out, and maybe because that term seems like it's been kind of thrown around too much. So I was like, let me get to some better information on this. If there's an episode that somebody would start with, what would it be?
Yeah, I don't think that's a bad place to start, the codependency. Okay. I find a lot of people really relate to it a lot, and that's a great one.
Yeah, I agree. Very, very insightful. I was able to get a lot out of that. So thank you so much for what you do. Thanks for sharing the information. I know, we kind of talk about how difficult it is to make changes in, kind of societal health stuff, but I think it starts with conversations like this, which is, a tribute to you and getting information out there and giving people, even if you have failed, therapy, or you haven't found the right path through traditional healthcare, there's an answer. Keep going.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Bronwyn. Have a great day.
Okay. You too.